Well, we have a new education secretary. She will be in charge of shaping the public education for tens of millions of school kids in this country. Trouble is, Betsy DeVos has not been a big fan of supporting the very thing that she will be dealing with. And she doesn't really have any experience to speak of when it comes to public education. In fact, she has spent her entire career funneling money into private and charter schools. Critics say that drains the public system, a system that she has been very vocal in condemning. She's also been called an ideologue who's questioned things like evolution, even over creationism. Last night, our own Dominic Carter, he spoke with one of the critics, and that is the United Federation of Teachers president, Michael Mulgrew.
Mr. President, thank you for joining us on this Thursday night.
My pleasure.
While it's early, last night you endorsed for mayor the incumbent mayor, New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio, and even the mayor is focusing on the new education secretary. Let's take a look at what he had to say.
This is a tough week for anyone who cares about public education. To watch someone become Secretary of Education who actually disdains our traditional public schools that are the lifeblood of public education, that makes no sense, and yet that's what we're experiencing.
So, Mr. President, we have a wealthy Republican donor with almost no experience in public education. But that doesn't necessarily mean that she will be a bad education secretary, does it?
If you go by her past, yes, it does mean that. Look, we've had this debate here, and we've had actual experience here in New York City of non-education chancellors, and that has not worked out well at all. We believe that experience does matter. You should have some knowledge. She has no experience in public education. None. In fact, at this point, we don't believe she's ever actually held a job. Her job has been to be an advocate on whatever she believes in, which is, you know, this is America, God bless her for it. But if you look at what she did in Michigan, where she got to do her advocacy and use her money to influence policies, she took Michigan from one of the top performing states in education to now one of the worst performing states in education. And she was very clear. She does not believe in neighborhood public schools. She believes that public school systems should be dismantled. She believes in no accountability for charters or vouchers. She thinks that a school should be able to remain open as long as it makes a profit and who they market to. That is her record, and she has stood by that in the state of Michigan.
So you're unwilling to give her the benefit of the doubt?
At this moment, the best thing I will give her is if she remains true to the Republican mantra of keeping the federal government away from neighborhood schools. If she becomes the Secretary of Education and says her number one priority at all points in times is to keep the federal government out of local schools, then I'll say she could be all right. But if any of her policies ever leak into anything that she's doing, which I don't see how it will not, since the president himself has said he wants to do some of her policies, then she's going to be a bad Secretary of Education because everything she's done has proven to be not good for children. Forget about the politics and the ideology. There is a proof point, a clear proof point, that where she has used her money to influence policy in states, it has proven to be a bad thing on behalf of children's education. They do not perform as well. They have less access to a good education. And it's all because of an ideological belief that education should be a market, a for-profit market system.
But do you think we'll actually see a reallocation of federal education money? Is that even possible?
They can use Title I money. Title I money has to be authorized. They could try to take apart the law that was passed, a bipartisan law that was passed last year. It took a long time for them to reauthorize what was known as No Child Left Behind and change that law to the Every Student Succeeds Act. That was done in a bipartisan environment, a very toxic environment, so both sides agreed to it. So she would have to undo that, but they have already suspended some of the regulations that were tied with that law. Because when President Trump said he was suspending and moved forward to suspend all regulations that were done at the end of Obama's administration, some of the education regulations were affected by that. So they're already having and starting down the path of we don't want to move forward to what was bipartisan and agreed upon in education.
You spent 12 years as a classroom teacher at William Grady High School in Brooklyn. In your opinion, how much damage can this new education secretary actually do?
I became involved with the union when No Child Left Behind was passed, because when I read it, I said, this is going to damage education. A lot of people were saying nice things about it, but I said, when the reality of that law is you're telling school systems to get rid of struggling children. You're telling an individual school the only way to succeed is to get better students, not to get better at educating the students you had. The law was clear on that, but everyone thought, oh, it says, no child's going to left behind. Nobody was even thinking about the testing components that were tied to it, because they didn't kick in until 4 years later. And it really did not have a positive effect, because we ended up spending more money on testing and this whole testing empire across the United States, as well as the fact that it did turn into, you want to be a good school system? Get rid of the kids who can't do well. So it actually started forcing school systems to do exactly the opposite of what the title of the law was.
Randy Weingarten, the president of the American Federation of Teachers, your predecessor, says the public must now serve as a check and balance on the new education secretary. I close this way. What does the UFT plan to do?
Well, just our work here in New York City, our school system has actually, in terms of its success, it has grown dramatically in the last couple of years. Our graduation rate for the first time ever is over 70%. The pre-K for all, which was you heard about for 40 years in the political circles, everyone running for office, pre-K for all. They got into office, never got done. It's actually been done here in New York City. So that puts a lot of pressure. Those are positive things. But the check and balance is, are your community, going to stand up to any elected official who is supporting policies that are going to dismantle your neighborhood public schools? So UFT is working, not just here in New York City, but we're working with our colleagues across the United States. We're working with our colleagues in Michigan, our colleagues in Ohio, colleagues down in Texas, in Florida, in California. We are forming a network of teachers and parents, and we're really just saying, we're public school proud. We want great neighborhood public schools, and the federal government, stay away from our kids.
Coming up next, everyone, we will switch gears and talk a little sports. Charles Oakley, he came back to Madison Square Garden, and he was promptly kicked out of the Garden, and not quietly at that. You thought Carmelo Anthony's drama was bad. Stay with us.